Hello, everyone. A very good evening to you all, and welcome to this webinar on ITIL4 and the digital enterprise working beyond IT. My name is Leanne Gordon, and I'm a marketing analyst at ManageEngine, the sponsor of this webinar. We're so glad that you decided to join us today, given the distressing and confusing times that we are facing, and I sure hope that you're all keeping well and staying safe. Having said that, let me introduce you to the presenter of this webinar, who indeed doesn't need much of an introduction. He's a very popular and renowned personality in the ITSM community. Most of you know him and know about his work. Barclay is an experienced ITSM consultant, analyst, and writer. He has worked on approximately 700 ITSM projects over the last 25 years. He also writes blogs, research, and papers on ITSM topics for a number of industry organizations and vendors. He is an ITIL4 architect and co-author and an editor of the ITIL4 Create, Deliver, and Support publication and a co-architect of the ITIL practitioner scheme with Axelos. So what better way to learn about ITIL4 than from the co-author himself? Barclay, we appreciate you taking the time to be here today to present this webinar. We look forward to learning from you about ITIL4 and enterprise service management and to also have some of our questions answered. So welcome once again.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. Very nice to be here.
Awesome. So participants, if you'd like to know more about Barclay and his work, please visit www.barclayrae.com or follow him on Twitter at Barclay Rae. All right, before I transfer the session to Barclay, I'd like to quickly introduce our company, ManageEngine, to you all. ManageEngine is the enterprise IT management division of Zoho Corporation. We have over a dozen real-time IT management tools, from Active Directory management tools, unified endpoint monitoring tools, network and application monitoring, IT service management, enterprise password management tools, business intelligence software, and more, all in the IT management spectrum. We also have offices worldwide, including the United States, the Netherlands, India, Singapore, Japan, China, and Australia, as well as a network of 200 plus global partners to help organizations tightly align their businesses and IT. So if you're interested in knowing more about ManageEngine, please visit www.manageengine.com. I'd also like to introduce you to ManageEngine's flagship IT service management tool, Service Desk Plus, which is available as both on-premises and cloud versions. Service Desk Plus is an ITSM suite with all recommended ITSM processes, including IT incident management, problems, changes, assets, service catalog, the CMDB, built-in reporting and analytics, and so on. The software also includes the advantage of being able to seamlessly integrate with the other IT management tools from ManageEngine and third-party tools as well. If you're interested in knowing more about Service Desk Plus, please visit our website at www.servicedeskplus.com. And we're finally starting our session with Barclay. And please bear the following things in mind, a few housekeeping items. All attendee lines are muted by default. If you have any questions during this session, please use the Q&A panel that you will see on the left side of your screen and send in your questions. We will be happy to answer them for you. We also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar, wherein Barclay will be responding to your questions. And of course, the recording of the webinar will be sent to all attendees in a couple days. You can also send in your feedback and questions to hello@servicedeskplus.com, and we will get back to you at the earliest. With that, over to you, Barclay, please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time of day it is. I saw some people signing on from Colorado, Scotland, India, all over the place. Just to echo the sentiment about, I hope everybody is keeping well and safe, and we think about those that are not doing so well at the moment. I'd like to talk to you today about enterprise service management and what that is, how it works, what it means. Is it a real thing? How do we approach it? And what kind of value do we get from it, particularly in terms of how we might use ITIL4. So there's kind of two parts to this, really. Enterprise service management and IT service management. I've got some things that you might want to know about enterprise service management and some challenges, and that's the first part of the session, really, which isn't too ITIL or ITSM specific, but it tries to just set out how it works, and I'll talk there a little bit about some of the tooling challenges as well. And then I'm going to go into just a few key points about ITIL4 and how that really supports enterprise service management and vice versa, and how we should be trying to think along the lines of some of the key concepts, key artifacts, and ideas that are contained within ITIL4. So I look forward to your questions and to the discussion at the end. That's just a little bit more about some of the things that I do and have done. Been involved in lots of different things in the industry for some time now. But really, to talk about the topic, and enterprise service management there's not a course on it at the moment. There's no particular classic industry framework. It's an expression that's been coined probably over the last 10 years. And again, at the moment, is coming back into prominence, I think, where the real value and opportunity of it is being realized. And in very simple terms, what it is at one level, it's kind of digital transformation internally in organizations, how we can improve the quality of what we do, the value of what we do by working together and working to predefined and standardized ways of working across our organization. So rather than having HR processes and finance processes and IT processes, we can pick the best from some of the core service management processes and practices that we know, and actually get significant value by doing that across an organization. No process, or as we call it in ITIL4, we refer to value streams, which is not just a single process, but a piece of work that moves across your organization, like somebody joining the organization, a new starter. That doesn't just fall into one department or one team. It goes across a number of them. And most organizations have a number of those kind of value streams. They go across from HR to finance to marketing to customer services to legal and back to customer services, and IT supports them all to some extent. So what we're saying with enterprise service management is that we actually know and have seen a lot of value coming from the processes that we use in service management. And there's a great opportunity to say, well, let's use that knowledge and skill and expertise and experience and actually get that working across the whole organization, not just across one or two departments. And also get the benefits of using tools that can do that and can actually provide that kind of support across an organization. So again, rather than having an IT service management service desk tool in one area and a field service management tool in your logistics teams and your facilities teams, and HR has a service desk logging system and so on. But also not just those tools, but lots of other things that we have that we keep in spreadsheets and we keep in little databases that we built in our teams. Wouldn't it be much better from the point of view of accountability, managing risk, to actually have these running on properly controlled and managed systems that integrate with each other, that keep data in one place, that manage knowledge, that do all of those things to improve our quality, our consistency, our efficiency, and so on. So there's a great opportunity to do that. We've been doing it one way or another for years, for over 20 years in some cases, where aspects or bits of the tooling and some of the processes that we have for customer service, for HR processes and so on, have been tagged onto a lot of those systems. But actually, I think what we're saying now is really we should be looking at that from a much more holistic perspective and saying, right, well, we really do need to manage this properly. And the backdrop to that is corporate governance, that actually organizations are now much more thinking from a holistic and sustainable point of view. What do we really need? What are we really trying to achieve? Are all our departments working together to achieve that? How can we optimize the way that these departments work and manage the cost and efficiency? Well, actually, wouldn't it be great if we did more that was joined up across the organization? So that's the opportunity. That's the scenario that we're looking at with enterprise service management. ITIL4 has a number of elements in it that really fit that really well. One of them being the whole concept of value streams, that we think of work going across an organization. In ITIL4, we define it as going from opportunity and demand to value. And it goes through a number, it gets processed through some of the elements that we've created within ITIL4 in the value chain, and the number of volume modules of that, supported by governance, supported by the guiding principles, and so on. That is an opportunity to do those practices, and the elements within that are completely transferable way beyond just IT. They're not just IT processes. They can be completely used and developed in other areas as well. So actually the idea of the value stream, and also that we co-create value happens when we not just provide a service, but actually it's used as well, and it can involve several parties to do that. Collaboration, integration of work, all those things are the backdrop to all of this. So enterprise service management, whatever we might want to call it, is there as a real life opportunity for organizations to really optimize the way they work, to support their overall goals and objectives. Not just, we're not just trying to be agile, or we're not just trying to do things in a particular methodological way. What we're saying is we want to do what the organization needs to do, and ensure that that's all working together. And ITIL4 actually provides a lot of very, very useful tools and artifacts to support that. So that's the backdrop to what we're talking about. IT service management can be thought of as the basis for a lot of this, and I very clearly using the term practices here, because in ITIL4 we've elevated that concept from process. Processes still exist, but they are part of a bigger concept, which is a practice. So incident management is a practice. It hasn't changed drastically in ITIL4, but the context of it has changed, that it includes not just a process, but also the use of tools, people, skills, resources, capabilities. All those things combine to make up a practice. And those practices that we know, and particularly the core ones that we know in IT service management, are incredibly portable and transferable to other areas. So if we take that premise and just hold that for a second, and very simply, what is in service management? Well, it's how we engage and work with our colleagues and partners. It's the way that we work to meet business needs, develop, demonstrate value, and so on, deliver products and services. The approach that we take to managing risk and accountability, efficiency, all those kind of things, can come out of this, particularly if we develop a good approach to data and analytics. How we then develop new and updated products. So if you like, the portfolio that we run to make sure that new stuff coming in is going to be properly built and can be properly and adequately supported. And that really is if you like, the strategic backdrop to everything that's in ITSM and ITIL. not just the running and support of stuff, but actually the build as well, so that we ensure that when we do come to run, it is done in the most optimum way, and it's not just lobbed over the fence, as many of you will recognise from the past. And how we also manage our corporate assets, how we manage risk, but also how we make sure that we understand what we've got. We know enough about it to be able to manage it. More and more with cloud models, we're becoming more distant from really having a grasp of the complexity and the interconnectivity of all our systems and services. So part of this is to build models that help us to understand that and help us to operate in the best way possible, that we're not just sort of completely in the darkness as to what it is that's being supported and what it's being delivered. So that's, if you like, some core benefits coming out of IT service management. And again, enterprise service management is just applying that positive collaborative way to get the whole organization working to the same goals. Very simple, these two things. IT service management, proven practices to provide consistency and value that are easily portable, and what we would then call enterprise service management. Again, as I said, it's not a formal thing. There's no training course as such on it yet, but it's applying service management practice in a collaborative way to get the organization working together. If you think about the things that are critical to the success of IT service management, they are the same things that are critical to the success of this, which is organizational change management, understanding what we need to do to get people to work slightly differently and to work towards the benefits of that. Understanding, as I said, things like data and how it all connects together. Understanding risk, understanding our customer goals, our business objectives, all those things, so that actually when we come to look at data analysis and metrics, we're measuring the same things, we're comparing the same things. That's one of the huge benefits of this. All your teams will be working to the same kind of operational metrics. They'll have differences, of course, and that may vary to a greater or lesser extent, but there'll be some core things that will be the same, and the data will be the same. That's the other thing. You hear lots of stories about data being created all in the same place, then distributed out to lots of teams, and then sent back to the center with the flavor of each department. And by that time, the data becomes incomparable because it's been changed. Actually, if we think about starting with the same data and trying to work towards the same metrics, then we're going to be in a much better position to make good decisions and to manage what we've got effectively. Some key things, just some key points, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's just a few things to bear in mind if we're going to try and make enterprise service management work. It's definitely best approached through a strategic approach. If you have the top of the organization saying we're going to do this and work together, that's a huge step forward in terms of leadership and governance and drive and direction. Many organizations, it doesn't happen like that. It's driven up through various departments, and there's value in that as well, because you can try things out, you can learn how to do it. Sometimes the big approach can fail if it's not conceived properly, if it's not planned properly. But there's nothing like the top of the organization, the executive, being very clear that they want to do this, if possible. A strong, effective, and user-friendly service portal is accepted. Self-service is at the core of this. The automation and self-service technologies that exist are there to provide the interface for people to use these systems, but also, just as importantly, usually are there to help people to actually build and run this stuff without necessarily having to be technical experts. We have the concept of the citizen administrator, the citizen admin, citizen developer. So people who maybe work in a particular area of business that are not programmers, but they just need to be able to use tools to help them make this stuff work together. And that really is usually centered around, being able to create effective, user-friendly service portals to manage this. Small proofs of concept with friendly teams are useful to get started. So, learning from mistakes. If it is a bottom-up approach, then it really does work to be able to say, well, let's test this out with a team that we work with, or a department that we work with, and we know them and they know us. That's a good way to develop this. ESM can deliver cost savings and reduces risk. Well, it certainly reduces risk if you get everybody onto the same platform, everybody onto the same data model, everybody onto the same tooling and process infrastructure. But if you think about it, at the moment, you might have 5 or 6 or 10 or 100 different platforms in place, and some very, very kind of dubious from the point of view of security and validation, use of spreadsheets and things to manage work. Actually getting it onto proper tools is really increasing the safety and security around that, and reducing the risk. But usually it's also reducing the amount of expense that you would have by having to run those different systems. If it's all centralized, then you've reduced the number of vendors, you've reduced the number of systems, etc. So it definitely is a cost-effective approach, and that very often helps to drive the business case for them. Enterprise service management involves organizational change management, OCM. It's not just a product implementation. You can't think of this just simply as being, oh, we're going to get a tool and it's going to work. We've got to think about it from the point of view of how do we manage this with the organization? How do we plan for change? How do we plan for resistance? How do we, react to that and make sure that we mitigate that? The tooling is central to it, but it's not just the tooling. And that leads on to who actually runs this. It can't just be an IT project. Very often it's thought of as being an IT project, and it's expected to be an IT project, but actually, in most cases, it's not, and it probably shouldn't be, because it should be driven by business demands. I have to say that invariably it often is an IT project, just because of the way things are. And the expectations around systems, but ideally it shouldn't be. Co-creation of value is a key concept that underpins ITIL4, and enterprise service management is an ideal application of this. So it's the idea that departments working together will create value, rather than doing their own thing and then hopefully joining it up sometime at the end. That very often doesn't work. It doesn't deliver synergy. It usually provides siloism and barriers and resistance and feudalism and all those kind of things. Whereas if we think about what we're doing as being part of the same organization, working towards a common goal, that's much more practical. But overall, the way that we plan and think about this, corporate governance, and make sure that it's happening. And again, from the point of view, we always talk about governance as being something that sounds a bit dull and controlling. Actually, it is the heartbeat of your business. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to do and to deliver? What levels are we trying to reach? That sets out your strategy and hopefully your planning. But then the active part of governance is to be able to keep on top of that as it happens, and to either modify your planning or modify your resourcing or whatever it's needed, your investment, as you go when things don't go quite to plan, because they never do. So good governance isn't just something fixed and locked away from the business. It should be very much part of the business as it runs, or the organization as it runs, to make sure that it's doing the right thing and the right things are getting done, and that's done as much in real time as possible, not just at the end of every year we look back and say, well, oh well, we failed with that, oh well, let's do something else. Whereas actually it's much more dynamic, and if we've got systems and tools and ways of working that allow us to do that, much more dynamically, then we're going to be able to operate much more dynamically as an organization. So those are some sort of key things to bear in mind when we're thinking about enterprise service management. What I just want to share with you very quickly is a couple of views of what we might have thought this would be and what areas of work this might cover. So on the left-hand side here, we might have our IT technology organization. On the right-hand side, we might have our various business departments and operations who are users. And we've kind of traditionally thought, I think, that we can start to extend some of those ITSM processes, as it were, practices as they are now, that they can kind of grow out of this, that we might extend it across, maybe using the same system. So when we talk about things like incidents and problems and requests and changes and so on the business side, that is similar. It's work items that we pass to each other. It's how we manage work across teams. It's faults and requests and projects and knowledge. And I think we've thought about it traditionally as being, well, we will just use ITSM tickets, incidents and problems and changes, and maybe rename a few fields, and that will do the business. And somewhere in the middle, we'll kind of join up. It's much more than that, and it's much more interesting than that. It's much more complex, and there's much more opportunity from that, because in the middle there are now so many opportunities and so many areas that we can be thinking about, where we need to be building stuff, managing, and making sure that these things are actually happening, supported by, in some cases, technology, and in other cases, the way that we work. But looking at systems integration, looking at how we would develop automation to manage a whole number of things like requests, workflow, and approvals, focusing on the quality of the user experience, the customer experience. So what the interface of the self-service is like, the data that comes out so that we can start to get good business analytics, how we work together to effectively digitize our work, and to support, as I mentioned, the admin developer. There's a whole number of areas there. And from the tooling perspective, and without going into any detail about products, but there are many tools that will do all of these things. There are some that will do bits of them, and there's no right or wrong with this. I think the idea is that we need to look at what we've got and what we need. And as long as we have this overriding approach, which says we are managing this from a corporate perspective, we're not managing it from an IT perspective on the left or just from business departments on the right. We are looking at this and making sure that it's working together. The actual landscape of the tooling, to me, doesn't matter so much. The more integrated and the more, if you like, reduced and streamlined, probably the better. But there will always be teams and departments that have very specific requirements, and we can't just, railroad them and say, no, you're going to work to this tool, and it's only going to give you 20% of your current functionality. I think we have to just make sure that we've got an integrated view of how this might work in future, and maybe in that case we might then have some core requirements for inputs and outputs that all the systems need to use if they're going to be integrated, as opposed to it all being one system. So that's just just to give you a sense of, there's a whole number of areas that we might be thinking about with enterprise service management. It's not just about requests and problems and changes or faults and pieces of work. There's a whole number of capabilities, and we're talking about workflow, and we're talking about automation for how we manage starters and leavers, how we manage requests, how we deal with everything that we do in our business, from parking to allocation of equipment, rooms, geographies, and all these things. Now we should be thinking of that from the point of view of, how do we integrate that as an organization to make it easier and more user-friendly as employees of the organization to work with? How many times have you tried to organize a meeting where you have to go into one system to book a room, and another system to get the people together, and another system to get AV equipment or whatever, and then you have to communicate it all through maybe 2 or 3 other platforms in order to reach out to everybody, and internal, external, and so on. The more that we can have, whether that is automated, where it is delivered seamlessly as much as possible, and that can be built without it being something that takes 2 years to build and 20 developers at X $1,000 a day. That's where we're going with this, reducing the cost, reducing the complexity, and improving the ability to manage across the organization. So I mean that slide, when you get these slides, just supporting those areas of green which we probably haven't thought about too much in the past. Challenges, moving on to that before we come on and talk about ITIL. So the challenges, there are many with this. There are many of the challenges that you would have with any major change program or transformation program. Some quite specific to enterprise service management, which would be, where do we start with this? Who owns it? Which, we do have a number of systems that cover a lot of that functionality that we just talked about. Do we use some or all of them, or do we start again? Those are big questions to be answered. The other thing is where individual teams might say, well, we've already got stuff in place and we're working very well, thank you very much. We just spent X amount of money implementing some new systems to help us to do that, and actually we don't really want to be bothered with having to change it all again. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. I think at some point that there needs to be an understanding of the cost involved in changing again, the potential benefit. So is it actually worth changing it or not to achieve a greater amount of synergy? Or actually is it more just about how we work together to integrate with those systems, as I mentioned earlier? And there's no right or wrong there. That needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. There's also the point of vendor orientation, entry points into an organization. And I've mentioned this, I think it's important because there's been lots of vendors trying to provide services, obviously trying to sell their products and services to do this. But actually, one of the problems with that is, where do they go for that? And that you might go, well, I don't care. But it's important, I think, from your point of view as well, to have a clearly defined corporate approach to that yourselves. And it will definitely then help vendors to where to go if there's there's this team or this department that is actually running with this and running towards the overall integration. But it's also important, I think, just to be clear at an organizational level what the organization is trying to do, and is it actually a corporate initiative, or does it only cover certain parts of the business? So it's not just from the vendor's benefit, although that's important, and that could probably save you time and money if they know where to go. It's also about just, have we really thought about this from a global organizational perspective? And finally, coming out of that is what is the value that we expect? So like anything else, we're not just going to do it because it's something that everybody seems to think is a good idea. We're doing it because we want to get X benefits coming out, X opportunities realized, and X amount of value delivered. So, the overall thing as to, do we call it enterprise service management? Doesn't really matter. It's about transformation. It's about how we as an organization work better together. And we may call that a whole number of things, but certainly at a hierarchical level, it is about the whole organization using some of the skills and knowledge and experience that we've built up in IT service management and other areas to achieve business benefits. It's a business project. It's definitely not an IT project, and that's why I said earlier it shouldn't be run by IT. Okay, just moving on to the second part of this then, briefly, and then we'll look at questions. So I just want to highlight some areas of ITIL4 that really support this, and key artifacts, key ideas that are provided through the ITIL4 model and explained in the books and courses as now defined. It's all out there. ITIL4 has been, Foundation's been out for a couple of years. The second level of book managing professional and so on, those have all been out for a year or so. We had ITIL practitioner 4 or 5 years ago working towards that. So a lot of the ideas have been out there for a little while now. And I do constantly hear, working with a client even today, who's just saying we've just sent everybody on an ITIL4 training, and it's improved the awareness, the contextual awareness, the understanding of the business relationship between business and IT so much better. So, I mean, it's always good to hear. And it's good to know that ITIL4 is actually delivering value back to organizations. It's not just more process stuff. So there's 4 or 5 areas here. I think overall, context, language, and presentation. So the way that this has been put together, the way it's been written, the language and the format, the running through ITIL Foundation and other books, there is a, if you like, a sort of a storyline analogy theme, which puts it all into business context, and that tells its own story that ITIL can be transferred into a business context. The language might be simplified, the use of practices might be simplified, but it does actually help organizations to work. So it's providing a strategic and business focused context for service management in a much wider sense, not just IT service management. Also within ITIL4, we're very careful to try and work in a more convergent way and synchronize with obviously things like agile and DevOps, but also particularly product management. Product management, I think, and service management we see as coming together more, that product management has got to think more about how stuff will be run. But in service management, we also need to understand better the components and phases and inputs that we can add value to product management. So again, that's appealing to a much wider audience, both within the IT industry and at the business level, where product management's been understood for a long, long time. Overall, ITIL4 is a holistic framework which can appeal to a broad business audience. It's deliberately been done in a way that appeals to a wider group of people and also takes the context of what IT does and how it delivers it and how it supports it to a much more strategic level. A lot of the day-to-day processes as we know them haven't changed that much, but the context of which they've been set in, I think, has shifted significantly, and that's added value to a whole number of different stakeholder groups. The concept of services co-creating value is absolutely fundamental, and it falling out of that is collaboration. Falling out of that is the idea of value streams. But that our technology services and our business services deliver value through use rather than just by being delivered. So you provide a system that nobody uses, or it's lying unused overnight. It's not delivering any value. It's just cost. The value happens when people are using it. Analogy, the simple analogy is the railway network or the road network, again, lying empty. So much possibility that can happen in terms of travel and routes and types of trains that can run over it. The value happens when the trains actually run over it. Those are the moments of truth. Those are the instances where the value happens. Also, it's worth bearing in mind that those are the opportunities where value can be lost as well. So if the way that service is delivered isn't effective, that may seriously impact the experience of those actually using it. So when services are consumed, that's when value happens. And that requires that we think much more collaboratively, and that we are thinking about how we deliver our internal services, our internal systems and products to at least a level that's equivalent to the experience of external customers using technology. We all use other stuff in our home lives, Why is it that work systems don't seem to replicate that? Well, again, this is the opportunity to do that. There's the concept of value streams, which is working across teams. And I said, incidents and problems don't just land across teams. Requirements and requests don't just follow the structure of your organization. They tend to go across teams. So we should remember that. We should try and map out to ensure that we understand that. And of course, that also means that will be experienced usually by an individual, regardless of the teams. A user of any particular service won't know or shouldn't need to know which teams are involved in delivering their request for a new PC or whatever. Why should they? But we need to recognize that the experience of that, the experience of the value stream, will be a singular one for each individual. So again, we need to be able to map our work and the interaction with other teams and so on from both an internal and an external perspective to make sure that we're doing it properly. The guiding principles, something been around for a while now since ITIL practitioner, really, really fundamental to get away from the model of ITIL being thought of as prescriptive and autocratic and, we must do it one particular way. Absolutely not. Never has been, but this is really seeing it really in relief. We should use flexible practices. We should use a flexible approach to make sure that we do the right thing in the right situation. I think good service management people are flexible people. It's not just about following a hard process all the time. It's about being able to understand the context of any given situation and react accordingly. And you can't write a process for every single situation. So there is a point where we need to work to a much more a sort of principle-based approach rather than just simply having everything documented and nailed down as part of a process. So understanding context and being able to adapt to it is absolutely essential. And the guiding principles provide you with those kind of axioms to follow. Start where you are, focus on value, think holistically, work holistically, be transparent, make work visible, all those kind of things that come out of the guiding principles. Automate and optimize is one of them as well, to really ensure that we're doing the right thing when it's needed. And I just mentioned automate and optimize, which is actually one of the guiding principles. We're saying in ITIL4, if there's one thing where we're saying ITIL says, this is probably as close to it as we can. But we should be thinking all the time about optimizing our processes, optimizing our practices, and automating them where possible. Anything that is repetitive, error-prone, dull, prone to human error, we should be automating that, and we can do that now, and focusing on the things that we do really well. And this is the demand here is top-down and bottom-up, that we're seeing that coming through IT in many cases, but also from business areas who are saying, no, we need more automation. We understand that that's the way the world's going. So ITIL4 does mandate automation as much as possible. Not to automate everything, but to automate the things that make sense to automate so that we can spend more time doing productive, human-centered work that focuses on, the human experience and human response. And finally, the 4 dimensions are there to provide context and balance, so that anything that we're doing in one area, we must make sure has been thought of from the counterpoint, the opposite perspective. If we're just building a system, we have to think about it from the point of view of structure, organization, process, people, and so on as well. And again, it reminds us that work is connected. So we can't just do things in silos. We must be thinking about the bigger picture and making sure that when we do a piece of work in one area, we change something, we think about the context or the impact in other areas. So those main concepts in ITIL4 are absolutely essential and fundamental, I think. Co-creation, the value stream, the guiding principles, the 4 dimensions, the needs to automate. They're all provided in ITIL4, clearly defined and so on, to help organizations move towards a much more synchronous and integrated way of working. As a summary, I think ESM potentially uses the proven value of ITSM to deliver business value across an organization. It requires good governance, organizational change management, a great self-service portal, plus a flexible strategic approach. So we've got to think about how we're going to do this in context, and we can't just expect to do it one size fits all from day one. We may have to do it in phases. The challenges are about who owns it, how do we start, who drives it, ideally not IT, what are we trying to achieve, and how do we manage the puzzle of the number of tools that we have at the moment. If we've got 200, how do we get down to 50? What's the best way of doing that? And overall, ITIL4 is it's a modern, flexible approach to develop enterprise service management as a business language with the guiding principles, co-creation of value, and so on. And most of all, good governance. So that's my little presentation. I'm going to come out of that now, and hopefully, if there are some questions, we can start to look at taking them as we go. What have we got there? Where would we like to start?
Hi, Barclay. Thank you so much for that presentation. Can you see the questions tab? Are you able to access the questions?
Yeah, I'm looking at questions. What is beyond IT? Don't know, the universe, perhaps. Yes, so let's just have a look through. Do you want me to just go have a look through these questions?
If you'd like me to read you some, I can do that as well. What would you prefer?
I'm okay unless you want to pick any out. Let me just deal with a couple of basic ones before we go into some of the bigger ones. If I have the ITIL version 3 foundation, can I apply to obtain the ITIL version 4 certificate? You have to take the ITIL4 foundation certificate. There is a bridging course of transition between ITIL expert and the managing professional, but there's no bridging between foundation. The foundations course, the version 4 is fundamentally different, in my opinion, much better than the version 3 one. So it's worth just taking it. It's not just a bad luck one. That it's a good opportunity to learn some new stuff in version 4. Yes, I'll be providing the recording and the slides. What are the best practices guidelines to strengthen governance? That's a really good question from Asha Kadava. I think it's interesting because there's a lot of different ways of looking at governance. There are models. And there's an ISO standard for IT corporate governance, ISO 38500. There are lots of different, if you like, I suppose, consultancy-based models for how you can manage an organization. In the UK, we have the Institute of Directors as well, and its affiliates globally, and similar industry bodies that will have governance models. For example, things like directors training and directors responsibilities. So this is getting way out of IT, but it's really, really important that organizations understand that they have a duty to manage the way that IT is delivered and the way that services are delivered in the best possible way for their organization. And it's their job to make sure that that happens and that it works effectively. So there are a number of different ways to manage that. I mentioned a couple of there. What's my experience of ESM and ITIL in the public sector? Actually, that's quite an interesting one because it's happening more and more and more. I'm just seeing lots and lots of examples of it. And it goes from fully, understood in the way that I've defined it, where there's a drive from the top of the organization to synchronize work. And that requires a whole number of changes from the way that we buy things to the way that we hire and what our job titles are and so on, the tools that we use. To, at the other end, lack of understanding of how that needs to come together, and perhaps problems with scale where you have really huge organization. So I think the larger the organization, the more challenging it becomes, and it may be that you need to use some kind of divisional approach. But I'm seeing it all the time in the UK, certainly, where the approach to synchronizing work is just happening. It's not as if it's a big strategic move. I think things like ITIL4 help to support it and help to give it some shape, whereas in the past it's been, well, let's just work this way. Doesn't the S and ESM suggest service, i.e. one group or silo doing something for another, co-creating values and more collaborative concept, teams working across the enterprise? Yes, of course. The fact is the S in ESM is for service. The S in service management is for service. I mentioned earlier that there's more and more synchronicity between service management and product management. I don't really care what we call it. Service management is a term that's convenient and is used and understood in a number of different areas and has been for some time. And I don't think we should get too hung up on it, whether it actually does refer to services or not. But if we use the concept of value streams and co-creation, then that's the important thing, not whether we call it service or not. Cost saving, sometimes it's hard to calculate the cost, especially if the ESM instance do not have initial information or KPIs to compare and after the ESM implementation. That's a good question, because counter to what we might have thought for many years and the way that we think about our industry, which has generally been quite negative, I think. We've tended to think, oh, actually, we haven't really done service management that well. We haven't achieved the things that we set out to do. Probably not, but we've made great progress. We've got lots of experience and knowledge in this area. As it turns out, when we come and look at other teams and departments, what do we discover? Actually, we're ahead of the game in IT service management. We really are. We have achieved so much more than we might give ourselves credit for. So we should recognize that and help other departments to start to understand what to measure, how to measure it, how to build consistency into what they're doing. Thinking about how you really make practices work across teams, how you do organizational change, how you manage communications, and so on. And the fact that in IT service management, we have brought in other things like marketing concepts, how we communicate. We've brought in data analytics. We brought in a whole pile of other things that really helped us to do this a lot better, even if we don't think we've maybe achieved as much as we would have liked. The fact is that when it actually comes to a lot of other departments across the organizations that we're in, they are behind the curve generally. Not always, but generally they are. They haven't managed work the way that we do. They haven't thought about it from the point of view of, the way that we think about incident as being something that we restore and problem as being something that we need to long time fix and change it, how we manage change effectively, and SLM as targets and so on. All those simple things not always been in place. So we're ahead of the game, and that's where the big opportunity is, I think, for service management professionals is to be able to sort of expand our knowledge and capability to move into other areas, to help other teams to work together, as long as we're prepared to modify, change our language, our focus, and be able to think outside in, not just IT centric, not just talking acronyms all the time, be able to listen and engage at the business level and focus on what the businesses are trying to achieve. We do all those things, we'll make it work. One more question I'm going to answer just now. How does ITIL fit in organizations where agile is seen as the way of working? Teams' functions are given autonomy to do things their own way. Well, I think for a long time we've listened to the marketing hype that says it's agile and DevOps or ITIL and ITSM. And when I was saying earlier that I thought governance is really starting to take hold in organizations, one of the frustrations of that is because at an organizational, at a board level, where people aren't daily engaged with, continuous integration or IT incidents, they don't really understand or frankly care about whether it's agile or ITSM, or they just want things to work and they want things to do to support the business. And a lot of the frustration that I've come across in the last few years, and organizations have asked me to help, is to say, how do we make this work together? Because we think that agile is probably pretty good, and we know that ITSM works, it needs to be updated and so on. So there's much more of a convergence. I think there's much more of an understanding. There's still lots of organizations where there's a real divide, no question about that. But there's lots of areas of commonality. And I think in a lot of the frameworks, so ITIL4, we definitely tried to build on the convergence, things coming together. We tried to use product management language. We tried to build in as many agile concepts. ITIL Practitioner is a DevOps ITSM book. All those things where we started to say, and you look at the other models, IT for IT and Verism and BRM, and all, they're all working towards how do we work together? How do we work together as people? It's not us versus them. It's how we work together. So there's no simple answer to how do you make ITSM or ITIL work in an agile organization. The only thing I can say is that there's no such thing as an agile organization that's successful and that doesn't still do a lot of the things that are in IT service management. How we manage work, how we pass things around amongst ourselves, how do we make sure it's efficient, and so on. All these things need to happen in organizations, whatever you call them. So the more that we can think about it from a convergent perspective, the better. And I do still see programs where it's like we're going to go all agile and everything's going to be agile. And at the board level, and I've been involved in sitting on various boards over the years, I would be kind of going, well, okay, great, but why are we doing everything agile? Do we need to? What business objective is that supporting? And that's why we need more real collaboration and communication between what people in operational activities are doing and what people at the board are expecting and demanding. And once it gets to that level and they go, well, just do it, work together. Don't care if you're agile. I don't care if you're not. Get it done according to what we need to achieve. Then we'll get some success. Okay, I'm just looking at the time. There's quite a lot of questions there. I'm happy to follow up on some more of these as we can. I've tried to answer a few. Anything else to add to that before we call off?
There's a question about MSPs. Maybe how can an MSP organization easily get started with ITIL4 to provide a better experience and add value to its customers?
Oh, that's a great question. I've got about 2 minutes. I recently did some work with an MSP that had been asked to do to work with one of its clients where their existing relationship had been incredibly transactional and everything defined in very, very great detail on the SLAs. It was absolutely operational focused. Very little actual definition of the business goals, that sort of thing. And at the end of the tender that had been produced, there was also this point about, well, and you need to be ITIL4. So I was asked to help the MSP do that, and the MSP actually was also operating in that way with that client. But once I actually explained ITIL4 to the MSP, they were like, this is what we want because we want to be able to deliver more value. We feel at the moment where everything's nailed down to the fine degree of every SLA and we lose money and points and all sorts of things every time we don't answer the phone within a certain time or fix an issue within this amount of time. We get it's all penalizing. It's all confrontational. We're not actually focused on what the organizations want. So MSPs that really want to deliver value can get a lot of that from ITIL4 because it gives them the language to do it. It gives them the artifacts to do it. They've got to want to do it, and of course, they've got to also go over to their clients and help them to start on that journey as well. And it's not something you can just change overnight. But it does come down, I think, to the quality of the MSP. If the MSP really wants to make a difference with their clients, then they've got to be thinking about value stream, end-to-end, value-based delivery, not just transactions. We do exactly what you've asked us to do, and we don't ask any questions. And you either pay us or punish us. Doesn't matter. To me, that's not a very productive relationship. I think where both parties are working towards shared goals, co-creation of value, actually working towards common objectives, that's a much healthier and more sustainable and long-term relationship.
One last question, is that all right?
One last question. Sure. Yeah, I'm fine for time. Just
Yeah,
we're going too long. And
out of time, yes. So this will be the last question. You mentioned at the beginning of your talk ESM value from a holistic aspect, but how do you bridge varying departmental needs with an ESM philosophy?
oh, how long have you got? Well, I mean, it comes back to, like we're saying, this is about organizational change management. So the organization needs to understand and be able to define what it wants from its technology and from its departments. It's got to be able to define what it wants to achieve as an organization. And then that needs to be cascaded to the rest of the organization so that they can work out how best to do that. But I'd say that the executive also needs to be involved so that they make sure that that's done as much as a collaborative and cooperative project as possible, so that it's not just, well, you're going to do this and you won't talk to the other people and you're going to do that and we'll measure you just on whether or not you've done this or that. It's got to be, and if you think of things like the SIAM model, which is how you would manage a multi-supplier landscape, it's the same idea that actually there's no point just saying, well, we're just going to buy the individual components and see if they join up. We've got to make sure that in order to achieve our goals, we've set out a strategy that the whole organization is working towards. So, I mean, actually, you could use a SIAM methodology to say, right, well, we've got some external providers and some internal providers, and we're going to make sure that they're all working to the same goals and objectives. They understand what each upstream and downstream activity is that comes into them and it goes on after them. And work on that basis. But overall, it is about having a organizational change management approach, thinking about the impact on the people, how we're going to sell, what are the messages we want to get across from this, how are we going to convince people that it's a good idea, what's in it for them, what are the benefits. We've got to manage that as structured communications. We've got to be able to deal with resistance. We've got to think, actually, in some cases, I know some organizations where they've had to restructure all their jobs and departments. So that's very, very challenging from a people management perspective, but it's what they needed to do. They had to go through the pain of it. And once they'd done it, then they were much better set to be able to deliver a much more integrated way of working. I mean, you think of things like councils and local authorities. Huge number of them have built up over the years where it's all in silos. So, the people that deal with the street traffic and streets and traffic lights and garbage collection and all the different services that are provided, education and so on, they're all kind of working separately. And sometimes, a lot of the times you just need to engage with that organization and be able to get a service that's joined up. That's what digital transformation is about. What we're saying is that actually this extends much further within the organization as well. I have a podcast on enterprise service management, enterprise digital. And we've talked about that quite a lot, where we said, look, is enterprise service management actually just digital transformation internally? And there's lots of different ways of looking at it, but it's the same digital transformation is probably bigger in terms of like the products that an organization provides and how it interacts with its customers. But the activities required to make that all join up tend to lead to the same kind of change, organizational change activities, the same challenges, and ultimately the same outcomes and practices and tools. So look at it from that point of view, from an OCM point of view, and perhaps also from a digital transformation point of view. Right, Lee, I think we're probably on time.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. We've run out of time and we have to close this session now. But thank you all for participating in this webinar. Thank you for taking the time to be here and for all the questions that you've asked us. We hope that you've enjoyed this session and found it useful. And we definitely look forward to having you on similar events in future. And if you do have any further questions, please reach out to Barclay on his website. Correct? Your
Yeah.
email address?
You can get me on Twitter at Barclay Rae or go to my website, barclayrae.com.
Great. So you can do that. And you can also send us an email at hello@servicedeskplus.com and we'll get back to you. So Barclay, thank you once again for being here today and for sharing so much of information on ITIL4 and giving us these great insights. Thank you so much, and we will see you all again.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.